Welcome back to another episode of Simple Haskell. Um, that was an interesting voice. But anyways, so today we're going to be looking at how to do XHR requests through Reflex, as well as how to make forms, which the forms part is in a way a little bit self-explanatory based on the other videos. Is it's really just a number of inputs and tagging them, um, with an event, as we will see. And so how I've set this up today is we have the source code, which is right here on my thingamajig, my GitHub, whatever call it. And so if you go to the XHR and forms branch, you will see the tutorial already fully done. And so I've of course already done this, but I'm gonna redo it and kind of go along with it and show you guys. Yeah, and you can see what that looks like. It might not look the redone version might not look that nice because there's a lot of CSS and I don't want to spend a lot of time on CSS because it's not really to the point. Um, yeah. So anyways, what are we going to do here? Well, we want to start by making our form, and yeah. So how we're going to start by making our form? It's quite simple. Let's make our um, another function. So we're going to call this contact me form, and it's going to give us a dynamic. We want to get back a dynamic form. And so because it's a form, we're going to want to have form validation. And so I'm expecting this to be, expecting, I'm expecting this to be something that, can fail. And it will be a dynamic because looking at the types of our inputs, we can see from, do I have Google still open? Please tell me I do. I do. Input element. If we look at input element, the values are all dynamics. And so what we're going to do with the multiple input elements is um, we are going to just use applicative to put them all together. And we're going to do so through a function which is going to do the validation. And we will see what that looks like in a second. Yeah, and it might be a good learning point for applicative itself and how to actually make use of applicative. And so I'm going to start by adding DOM builder here. I haven't gotten any issues, of course, because I don't have a function body yet. But I am expecting that I will need DOM builder as I am going to be using the L function, which requires DOM builder. So let's start by creating some outer shell, and it's going to be a div with a class. Oh, and I also in my example, and this CSS and classes, it doesn't really matter. I even encourage you to just leave them empty for the sake of, you know, uh, like highlighting what you want to focus on. You know what? I am largely going to do that actually. Come to think of it, because there's so much writing. Um, so how can I do this? ladder. I'll just say mempty for now. Mempty referring to the monoid instance for list. And I wonder if I can get. Um, you know what? Let me try and do something here. This might be helpful. GHCI loaded. Okay, one sec. Just so you can help with the explanations as we go along. So now if I load up GHCI, what was the type I was looking at? Type of mempty. So mempty is coming from the monoid class, and if we look at monoid, it was just basically a semigroup that has it specifies an identity case. And so in the case of map, it has an MMT, which is just simply an empty map. And so that's our shell here. Yeah. I don't need this. I'm going to say let input class. Just again, another placeholder here for when we actually do fill these in. And I'll probably pause the video, honestly, and just fill them in. Because there's not as much of a point in that. And I have another function that I defined here. It's yet another worthy thing to talk about, even though it's not necessarily directly related to our goal. And I think it's just a good use of, you know, how to start working with types that we have, options and functions that we have for Reflex. And so this is basically just going to be ladder with the style tag set up. So we have tag style. And of course, style is just one of many attributes, and so this is why we will be doing it this way. And ladder being the most general function. Most general function for simply writing DOM elements. And so it's complaining that we don't have a form type set up, and so we're going to want to create this. We don't necessarily need to do this. We could, of course, just use a tuple or triple or however many uple to create a form. The only actual requirements that we have to think about are that, as we'll see, and we will get there, but I do want to stay on track, is that it has to have an instance of to.json. So, yeah. And well, at least for the function that we will be using, which is post.json. So therefore, we must use JSON. And if you recall from the other ASON video, which I did, it's actually quite easy to work with ASIN. And so all we need to do here, starting with defining our form, is we're just going to make a form, and it's going to have 3 fields. And this is a little sloppy, so let's make this a little cleaner, because what this is going to be is someone's name, their email, and their message. So we're going to be building a contact me form. This is something I have for my portfolio in case people want to work with me. Shameless plug, kinda. And so let's say here that type of name is text. Type of email is t.text, and type of message equals t.text. And it's t.text because we have t imported qualified. We don't have to do that again, but we want to do that just because there's a lot of functions which overlap with Prelude, like for example, length. So here now, we're going to say name, email, and message. And let's delete that before it annoys me. Oh. So you haven't done anything with that yet. So this is obviously going to give us issues. And so let's get back to this. An unfinished function will definitely give us issues. And so we were going to make this a div. Um, and we had an empty string for what will be there. And then we're just going to have some text of contact me for our form. And my cat is now attacking me. Great. This is very important to programming. L class. And so L class is nothing that I've defined. L class is just coming from the Reflex.Dom.Widget.Basic. And yeah, and so why I'm using this is because I'm also using, and we will add this in at the end when we start looking at styling. I use Tailwind because my past work used it, and yeah, and so Tailwind operates through the classes like Bootstrap. If you're familiar with Bootstrap, if not, I don't know what to compare it to. And so I'm just gonna again leave that empty, and we're gonna have now more text saying have a question or want to work together. And another one. Uh, uh, and this is just going to be a little prompt for our form. Do I not have? Yeah, I didn't have it open. Okay, too bad. We will see it in a short moment. Yeah, we will see this actually quite quick. Because we don't need to do anything with the form to display it, of course. And so now we're actually going to make our first input element. And so we're going to make two input elements, and then we're going to use a text area element because if we use an input element, it is going to be really annoying because the user can only see a small little chunk of what they are writing. Let's say we are writing actual words here with real human meaning. This will eventually get cut off probably around here. And the user won't be able to see what they've written and are most likely to see or most likely to send illegible, writing like this kind of thing. Maybe a little bit better than this, but definitely illegible. And that's not their fault. We provided them with a bad user experience, so we will use a text area element for that. And so we are going to extract name from input element. And so input element. Actually, can I use Hoogle in this? Okay. Well, Hoogle is a command line utility as well. Um, it actually says you can set this up if you want, but we have that through OP Hoogle, so I'm just going to use that. And if we look at the type of input element, we're just there. It's going to take an input element config, which we know by this point that we can get by using def. And so, in case you're forgetting about def is just default, and so there is a instance of the default type class. Right, there's an instance of the default type class for all of the input element configs, and I say input element configs because we can work with any of these different types of elements. And there's a couple other ones that are, I believe, where is it? Let me try and find. There's is this? No. Checkbox. I'm looking for a checkbox, and for some reason it's been deprecated, but I think they are going to undeprecate it. There's not actually a reason for it. I guess, which I imagine is just because you don't need something like checkbox. You don't need a function like checkbox. And the reason for that is just because you can use input element to define anything that you want. So, let me just go back. So, anyways, and how we could do that? Let me see if I can remember. Um, was it through element config? Yeah, I'm not sure. Must be through input element config, but I might do a more focused tutorial on that. This is kind of supposed to be more about, well, I'm sure you know about XHR and forms. Um, but more on the XHR portion. The forms are kind of just because, if we're doing XHR, we might as well demonstrate it through forms. Um, and so, anyways, we have input element def, which will get us a starting um, definition of our input element config, and the only thing we're going to change, and we're not going to change it actually just yet, but we are going to say that the initial attributes, and so this is how we would, uh, set the attributes, quite like how we're doing ladder right here. Um, we set the initial attributes through this input element config. So, um, I'm just going to have it set to input class. We'll come back to that. We have another prompt for their email. And then the email is going to come from the other input element. Which I'm now realizing I could have just copy pasted. And lastly, we are going to say what message they would like to send. And so this message is going to instead come from text area element def. And so the def in this case, so where this is coming from is text area element config. And as you can see, it's pretty standard. Very similar to the input element config. Except just a little bit less. Yeah. And so, and honestly, you don't really need to customize these too often. Oh, wow. Ton of stuff here. Okay, you know what? So, just like I was saying MMT up here, I'm just putting MMT for now, because I actually have quite a lot of styling for that. And so now we've gotten to the actual core important piece. So we're still in our shell. And note too, by the way, before we get going on this, that if I say pure 1, then that is the result of this monad here. And so therefore, because I don't have anything after this ladder statement, the result of this entire function would be something with a pure 1. Where pure, I suppose, this wouldn't have anything to do with dynamics or events in this case. And so it would literally just be m int in this case. And that would be the same if we had yet another ladder. Do L for simplicity. and infinite else, it would just continue to propagate because it's just delivering the last statement of the inner monad. Yeah, and so that's not what we want to do. So let's get rid of that again. And that's complaining because that doesn't make sense now. And so what are we going to do here? So we want to create a function which is going to validate a form, except in order to do that, well, two problems. This is going to end up being kind of ugly because we're not, we don't want to style too much on the input elements. Like I do have a lot of styling for this, but it'd be better to style the container. That will provide us a nicer look. And so let's add just a little wrapper around each of these. So I have L style here, and L style. Oh, sorry, this one's L class. And yet, of course, my cat is asking for food after being fed only an hour ago. Actually, 2 hours ago, but come on. Guy gets fed 3 times a day. So, and I don't know. Anyways, so L class again, just providing yet another shell to make this a little bit better for styling. And there's another problem because this is going to return us if we look at the type of this, this is going to be an input element. Whatever the input element ERDT, right? And we obviously don't want that. We want the value of the input element, and so we want to use the value function. And if you do not recall, the value function is just an overloaded, or rather, it comes from the type class of hasValue, like how you have value. And so, and again, I explained this in the last video, but or maybe before that, but this is just basically a you can almost ignore this value wrapper around here. It will show you that if we were to ask, do some type checking on, like asking :t of what does this statement provide me, it would say that it provides you, in its applied form, it provides you a value of input element, value wrapping input element. And that's really just I might do a data families video to help explain this a little bit better, but ultimately, that's just saying value in terms of input element, and so it directly maps to some actual true result. And so in the case of input element, it was the input element value that's ultimately going to get called. And so, just simply like any other record type, we are going to apply input element value to this data type, and we're going to get this back as a result. And so, again, important to remember that this will just be propagated through the shell, because L class as well, and L style is a great example. We see that and this isn't something we can definitely assume from the type signature, but most often if we see something like the last argument being x and the result of the entire function is x, there's a good chance that we are just simply passing that thing back. And so whatever the result of the inner monad is going to be is what this is going to result in. Yeah. And of course, like, what does that mean too? Because we could have a bunch of L's, and we have, well, I'll just simply do L pure 1, right? This is going to result in X, where X is of the type int. And so, whatever, let's say we're talking about the outer shell of this contact me form, then what I'm saying about this being propagated would obviously not make sense because it's not the last thing that has happened, right? So, um, yeah, I hope that explains it enough. But effectively, the last action that's run in the last shell is what's going to happen. And really, at the end of the day, all I'm doing is explaining monads in terms of reflex. And so, if you're having trouble with understanding this, I definitely recommend going back and going right back to monads, or even maybe further than that if you did skip to this point. Um, so, yeah. Um, so now, so what we're going to do here, oh, and if I have to finish my thought, so I'm going to fmap value over input element, and now the type of this is going to be a dynamic t text. Yes, is going to be dynamic t text, as evidenced by that. And same with the other cases. I guess we should look at text area element and the exact same thing. Really, input elements and text area elements are not that different. And really, maybe you're thinking like a text area element is not that different from input element, and you're right. It's not that different, but neither are any of these configs. They're actually quite simple to use, and I might at the end, time permitting, do a quick select element for fun. So continuing on here. Okay, so this is going to complain just because of that, and then it's going to complain because of that. I just want to see if we have any errors there. Okay, great. We do not. Undefined will just work with anything. I guess I have never actually talked about undefined, so for the sake of completeness, I'm going to say quickly, it is just something that is going to map to any value. If we did load it up in GHCI, it would complain if we found it that we encountered an error. However, I could say that, well, I could make it the type of anything that I want to. And so I'm just checking to see that we are good to go. And this won't actually run as soon as I check this. As soon as I open up the page, it is going to complain that it encountered undefined when trying to create the page. So we obviously can't keep it here. And now we are at a point where we want to validate the inputs. And so what we're going to do is, well, let's just show you. So we are going to say, we're going to create a function, validate form. And this validate form, we are going to say takes well, 3 texts and is going to return us either t.text or a form. Let me just make sure that I'm not an idiot. Yes. And so we haven't written it yet, but let's just put a placeholder there for now. And so how we're going to apply this now is we're going to use applicative. And so there's a pattern you'll notice with applicative, and I'll just write it out here, that we do name email, message. And this is a common pattern you'll notice with with applicative is that we start with f mapping a function over the first argument and then continue applying from after this point by using the appropriate number of these applicative operators. And so to give you an example, let's say we wanted to use form, and we have a name, an email, and a message, but we want to just automatically create it as a form. And so we're going to forget all the validation part. We're just going to use the data constructor of form. And so if we fmap this form and forget the rest, what we'll end up with here is that we'll see form go from something that takes a name to email to message to form. And on the first application of this, we'll see this delete. And so if we check, right, I can even run this to prove this really quick. Oh, that's fair. So f mapping form over this is going to give us the resulting type of probably just doing something stupid here. Sorry, what am I thinking? I have to do this like this. And of course I'm an E shell, so I can't just go back. Let's say I don't even have an applicative in use here. That's why I am doing something really stupid here. And so if we fmap over just, so in the case here, just is going to be our applicative. Oh my god, I hate E shell. But I can only open up. Oh what? Let's just do this. This is going to be better. So we were doing this. Oh, and I might as well just. And if we check the type of form being fmapped over just string, we see that it goes to being a maybe string to form. And if we recall the type of the applicative operator, similar, but not what we want, we see that it's working with a wrapped up function. And so what we've done by applying the first, applying form to its first argument, which in this case has been wrapped by just, we have created a wrapped function. And so to continue on here, if we say applicative of just hey, then we see that there is one less argument that it takes, and finally, hello. We'll see that we have a maybe form. So still in the same context of maybe, however, we have ignored that context to create a form. And now, if we try to do one more, it would say that doesn't work. I already have a completed form. So that's why we need the appropriate number, which is just basic Haskell. So yeah. Um, and uh, so that brings us to making a validate form function. And I'm realizing too that we forgot to turn this into JSON, and so we'll come back to that. We'll let the error happen. Yeah, that's a better way of doing things. And so validate form is going to take a name, email, and message. And so what are we going to do here? We are going to say the case t.null. So from the text package, check if the name is null, and that's the only check that we're going to have on name. And we're going to see if it's true. We're going to say left name cannot be empty. And this will exit out of our function. We return with a left in the case, which fits our end type. Or if it is false, then we're going to continue on checking by saying, so we're going to import a library here, and we're going to call it email validate, which has a function of validate. Maybe you can guess what that does. It validates an email. And if we look at the type of this function, we'll see why I need t.encode UTF-8. And I actually don't think I have it. So here's what I'll do. I'll just say text.email.validate. Oh, there it is. And this is our function that we want to use. So we can see something like this will work. Obviously, a non-email will not work. And yeah, we could write this ourselves, but I guess why would we? And so the only annoying thing is that we have to turn it to a byte string for some reason, which I don't honestly understand, but whatever. And so this will return us either a string or an email address. And so I also don't like that it returns as an email address because it's just kind of an annoying. I don't really want to work with this. It's 2 byte strings. Not sure why that was the design, but I rescind. And so all that's going to happen in the case of the left error, let's start by showing this error in full. And so this error that we're going to get back is a string, and so we are looking for a text, and we're going to pack it to a text. Pack the string to a text. And in the case that it's right, we don't care what the end result is because we have a much nicer form of the email still available. That's just pure text form. If it is, in the case that it is actually a valid email, we just prefer the plain text form. And so then I guess we just continue on with our validation, and we have one last check that we want to see that someone is not just wasting, our server time or email credits by checking that the message actually is plentiful, and hopefully, we could also check that the length is not something small, like 10. You know what? Actually, let's do that. Check that the length of the message is greater than 10. And well, we're gonna write it in this sort of cascading way. We want the failure case to come first, so I'm gonna say case that is less than 10. So we're gonna check for the error case, and in the error case, we're gonna say left message cannot be empty or too short. And in the case that it is false. So our checking for the failure was unsuccessful. That means that by double negatives, we are good. And so we're just going to say now this is a valid form. Oh. Yeah. And so this is going to give us the issue that email validate no, there is no module named that, and that makes sense because we have not imported it yet. And so how we do that is we say text.email.validate as import qualified, text.email.validate as email validate, and this is going to give us another issue because it cannot find the module, and that makes sense. But it's actually not at all the problem. All we're going to need to do is go to our Cabal file, frontend.cabal, and add email validate, I believe. And we don't need to add it to this, but I recommend doing so just to get into good habits for when we do deployments. And it's saying that it's not finding it still. So what we have to do is just restart OB. And I'm going to use the verbose command just for fun, because I like seeing all this sort of stuff. Yeah, nice. So, and we should be good with that. I don't think there's anything else I had to do. I'm going to check that we have the right. Yes, we do. Okay. And now it's just going to give us an error because uh, we have messed something else up here. Yes. Cool. So now that works. We have a validated form, and we have contact me form all done, but we are not calling it anywhere. So it's pretty, un unpowerful at the moment. And so now we're gonna see a bit more about how to actually do XHR requests. And so we're going to start by saying we're going to call it ith form, ith form, and it's going to be wrapped in another div, which we will style later. And so it's going to be contact me form. And so the result of L class is going to be the result of contact me form, and the result of that is going to be a dynamic t either t.text form. And that should give us an issue. I'm actually going to leave that there just as a just for the clarity of it. And this is complaining because we need another language extension of scoped type variables, which is what's allowing me to label this this variable here. And so next so all we've done is created a dynamic. Nothing is actually going to happen, right? And nothing is. I mean, I suppose we could check if any of the input elements have updated, and then send a request. But that might be kind of silly because that means that every single time they enter in a character, we fire a request. So yeah, it just doesn't seem like a recipe for success. Um, yeah, and So the better way of doing things is to check when they click on the submit button. And that brings up the question, where is the submit button? Well, the answer is right here. Um, and again, we're yet again going to use the very simple button function, and that gives us submit. And so what we're going to do now is everything we're gonna do from here. Well, not everything we're gonna do. The next part I'm going to do for the sake of user experience and making a very useful form. So I'm going to say um, I'm going to return an error and the form to submit as a tuple, which I've unpacked by using the fan either function. And so what is this fan either function before we actually use it? So fan either is just something that takes an event with an either in it and splits it up into two events. And so what this means, it's really changing the structure of what we're doing with you know the either, because events may or may not happen, and so this may never happen. This also may never happen. Both of these may never happen, which I think is the easiest to think about. Um, but quite simply, I don't know how this is actually implemented. I might check it out after this video, now out of curiosity, because this seems like an interesting, um, important piece that will help me learn more of the details of how Reflex is actually implemented, which is something I'm slowly working towards. And but yeah, but largely at the end of the day, we have this function which can separate out events of the either. And so this will be our left, or our errors, and this will be our right, or our successes, which will be plentiful. And so to do this, well, let's do a little Dora type style quiz. Um, can this work with either form? Can we use either form in place of fan either? Right? Fan either takes a singular function, so can we just give it either form? No, we cannot. We want to first turn it into an event. And so, how do we turn it into an event? Well, like we were just talking about, we want to have this event fire, or our request fire anytime the user clicks submit and there is a valid request in the form. And we'll see about how to handle. We'll see about how to handle not sending invalid forms. Um, so, quite simply, like we talked about in the last video, we're going to use tag, which, just to bring it back up, tag is of the type behavior to event, and so the event TA here is being replaced, or the A is getting replaced by the behaviors B, and that's how we end up with the event TB, and so and we don't really care about this button, the A of submit, because it's just going to be a unit, so that works for us. Yeah, and so what was this? Tag either form and submit. However, we have another problem because this still doesn't actually fit, and this is going to cause an issue. It's going to say that this is not a behavior. It could not match expected type, so looking for a behavior, as we could see by here, and we gave it a dynamic. So what we need to do is use current. And so why do we need current here? Well, current just simply takes a dynamic and gets the behavior of it. So it's effectively taking a snapshot of this dynamic at a point in time, right? And so how this is going to go is the user going to um, fill in their form. It's gonna The update event is gonna fire a ton of times, and each of those is gonna result in a new dynamic, um, and like really a new snapshot of that dynamic from each updated, right? So they enter into form input one, that updates the dynamic as a whole. They enter into update form input two, that's going to update the dynamic as a whole. And so current is just going to take a snapshot once the user has finished filling in the form. Well, really, that's the ideal case. It's going to take a snapshot of the form whenever they click submit, as our code says. Um, so this works now, and we have fanned our events. So we have a error message that we can write. So let's create our error message by using hold dyn. And so we're going to start with no error message. And we're just choosing to model the error as a maybe error, because this makes sense. We might have the user create something that isn't error prone, or doesn't have an error in it. And so now if we do have one, we're just going to say that this is an error, and now we are listening to the error event, and in the case that the error event happens, we're going to fmap just over it, and that is going to take over the value of this dynamic. So the resulting dynamic will look something like just email invalid. And I kind of said that was at the type level by the colon there, but I was definitely speaking about the value level. Um, yeah. And so now we're going to display this error message by saying dyn text. And now we need to handle how to show this as actual text. So we know that coming into this, we need to go from a nothing, or sorry, rather a maybe error message to text. And so the real question is, what do we do in the case that there is no error message? So in the case that there is no error message, we are just going to say, nothing. That we're going to have an empty string, and from maybe will fit this, because from maybe, this is the function we're looking at here. It takes a default and maybe, and so in the case that it's nothing, the default is going to be what is returned. And so the first thing that we're going to see is an empty string. And then if we do get an error, we're going to see a error message as that string. And now we're going to fmap this over the error message. And it's going to complain because we don't have maybe imported. So that's pretty simple to solve. I'm going to import it as just the function, or what am I doing? From maybe. And that's working now. We have a working error message. Let's check out where we're at. We have an undefined somewhere. Cool. All right, we have our little form. No styling, but this isn't a tutorial on styling. So Nor would I ever be that person to give such a tutorial. Um, yeah, and so all we're doing is just looking at that. Now let's continue on and finally make this form request, or sorry, make this XHR request. Um, and so how we do this, uh, so if you're familiar with JavaScript, you might have the sense that we finally have to start. Um, if we're doing XHR on the front end on the client, you might guess that we have to start actually doing JavaScript. And how do we do JavaScript on um, on the client or in Reflex, I should say? And well, um, you know, it's quite simple. We're not going to get into it in this video, but we are going to kind of dumbly uh, use a bit of what is really JavaScript functionality to make this happen. Um, and you'll see what I mean in a second. And so what I specifically mean is this pre-render function. And so pre-render takes two arguments. We should definitely look at this. Pre-render. So pre-render is a class which has a core function for dealing with really server-sided rendering. Um, and so one of these, the first widget is going to be what happens on the server, the second on the client, um, and yeah. And then as we could see in the documentation very specifically that um, the end function that we have here, the client function, is what's going to replace the first function. So we're going to write something like pure never, and so that's going to just basically fit the type. Because as we can see, these have to be the same type, and that's the only restriction that we have. And that's so that it can fit with the rest of our code, whether that be on the server or on the client. And now, what we want to do here is, this is kind of where we're doing JavaScript. And we're not actually literally writing JavaScript or have to think much about how JavaScript works in Reflex, or rather JSADL. But, yeah, perform request async, as we'll see well, I guess we're doing this in the main obelisk function, so we won't see we won't be forced to see it, but we will see all the type constraints that do arise from using perform request async, which I think are definitely worth mentioning. Um, so, without further ado, we're going to use the function perform request async. And so what is perform request async? And this is where so you can see there's a lot more type constraints. I actually might even keep it here because this tells us, I think, everything we need to know. And there's just a lot of other information there. So what this is saying, basically, if we forget about all of these constraints here, as we can see, monad JSM, JSADL, but as we can see here, this is expecting one argument. So, and that argument is an event carrying an XHR request. So now we need to dive into this, because what is an XHR request? And we have a form. Does that work? Or and well, the answer is not really. So we have this nice function at the top here, which we are going to use to fit this to an XHR request. And so PostJSON takes anything that has a toJSON instance, toJSON being a class from data.ason, and yeah, and we don't need to actually do any of this work ourselves. It's really easy. Like, funny easy to use JSON. Um, just ridiculous. Well, at least it's always going to be easy, but especially easy for the basic use of ASON, which is all we are going to need here. And what exactly is that? Well, we're just literally going to do two things, or technically three things, because we have to do import and I suppose a fourth thing of language extension. But yeah. And so, anyways, core to the point, we're gonna say instance to JSON form, uh, and this is going to work because there's actually no requirements for a minimally complete definition. And how is that possible that something like a form can just be turned to JSON so easily? And the answer is because of generic. And so generics definitely warrant a discussion of their own. But quite simply, how I think of it as um, it's simply the language can understand um, like the actual core structure of your data type, and then just convert it to the generic version of it. And so like this form here, we could have written it as a record type, like this. And you know what? Let's do that. It's not going to change anything. And so this is going to easily turn into JSON, and it's going to look something like email, and you get the idea. Um, so that's what it's going to do, and we now just have to import to JSON from data.asyn. We're going to also need to import ghc.generics, but we'll do that in a second. Let's start by, just so you guys can see what I am actually doing, and hopefully this helps to actually just see how I go about this. I don't know. In terms of confusion, little confusions that could possibly arise. So now that I've changed my Cabal file, I'm just going to restart. And then I won't need to import anything else or add any more libraries. All I need to do is just effectively deriving generic and instance JSON form. And the last thing that is going to come up, and I will let the error message come up before I write this, is that, oh, actually that's not what the issue was, or yet, because we haven't imported ghc.generics, so it doesn't know we need that yet. And I've never seen that form before, that error before. But I suppose it is there. And we're going to get this first because it's going to complain about that. And finally, we need to enable derive generic. Cool. And now it's complaining about us having pure there, I believe. Yes, it is. So then let's get back to perform request async. And now that we have our two JSON instances, all we need to do is, so let's use post.json. And so post.json takes a URL and the JSON itself. And so the URL that we have, and this is actually just a BS URL for now because we haven't done anything on the back end, which will be the next video. It'll be a very short video on how to handle the data. It's actually quite simple, and I'm more doing it as a, to complement this. And so, anyways, post JSON, and the URL is going to be just localhost. Which I'm now realizing. Uh-oh. Ah, fuck. I'm completely unrelated problem that I just realized in my head. And I'm pretty sure my portfolio has had this localhost URL for quite some time now. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't even matter. Oh, my bad. I glossed over this. I am going to come back to this, and I'm going to instead say form submit. So we're going to fmap post JSON over the event because that is what is containing this form, and that will give us back an event txhr request, which fits with our our function. So now though, this causes a problem, and we've done everything we need to do. This won't work because the whole world is against us. No, I kid. This won't work because of a couple actually other issues that I glossed over. To JSON or post JSON. What's the module? Reflex.Dom.Xhr. Oh, it's all caps when it's not. And form to submit. Cool, we're good. Okay. And we have that's something else. Okay. Nothing to worry about there. And this will work. And we don't have our backend set up yet. However, what will happen is, well, you know what? Let's play around with this a little bit. So it's saying we have an invalid email. I originally just changed this to a different error message that I personally set up just to make it a little bit nicer. And if we do galen.sprout@gmail.com, I think I set something up wrong. Okay, so the empty or message is too short. Oh, and I think what's happening here, I was looking at this and going, what the heck did I do? But this won't change the error message if it is successful. So I'm seeing the last error message when if we had a backend, this would have actually sent. So let's change that to prove that I'm not just an idiot. I mean, that would be quite challenging to prove. But yeah, nothing. And this will listen to the form to submit case. And I just need to, I need to turn it from a list of events to a singular event, and now this will work. Let's try this. Let's cause an error. And now if I put in a valid email, will this work? Let's cause another error to happen. Yeah, message cannot be empty or too short. And so we add the other error message. We see that it reverts to nothing. Yeah, got some homework to do for my portfolio, I suppose. But anyways, so now the issue arises of what if this is what if this what if there is an error message um, like because we will get well actually I'm not quite sure if we will get, honestly, come to think of it. I just kind of copied from my portfolio again, but I'm real and I did that very quickly. So yeah, but I'm not quite sure that this actually will send a form request um, in the case of invalid result. And I could check this very easily by seeing what would happen if I have an invalid form and then having a dyn text of it. So let's do that. Um, let's do hold dyn, and we're gonna say nothing, and our event is going to be form to submit. Except we're just going to make it simple and say, hey, yeah, this will work. And oh, not sure what I did there. Um, oh, okay, so it won't submit actually. But you know what? Just because of fan either, um, or despite fan either, I still want to show you gate. So let's say um, we didn't have this sort of error message handling. One way we could sort of fortify that this um, will not fire, just to be, crazy um, careful. And I'm not even sure this actually makes sense, come to think of it. But the point I want to make here is that we can use gate to stop the error message from sending in certain cases. And so in this case, we're going to check if the current error message, um, or if the current error message uh, exists, if there is currently an error message. Um, and so whether or not in the case that the error message does not exist, or so, yeah, in the case that the error message does not exist, this gate will allow form to submit to actually propagate, and in the case that there is an error message, it will stop the event before this happens. However, as we've just now realized, anytime that the form to submit propagates, it should for sure propagate, which is pretty cool. And a very good use of fan either. I love fan either as a function. Um, and yeah, and so now let's do one more thing, and let's check that our request is successful. We won't be able to see that it's successful until we actually, um, implement the backend. And so we're just going to quickly do this. Um, so I'm going to instead, I don't actually need a monad for this case, but I will just return out of this do block, um, Reflex.Xhr response status text, and this is going to tell me if the response went through okay. And so now the response here will be of the type maybe text. And, or sorry, text. I'm looking for status text, not response text. So this is going to be of the type, I suppose, event t text, and which means we can create a dyn text from whole dyn switch dyn res. And so why do we need this? Because actually I'm also wrong. This is not an event t text. And the reason for that is because of the pre-render. So if we look at pre-render again, it returns whatever as a dynamic. So this means that the A is an event, right? We're puring the result of or this line here is an event t text, right? This line is an event t text. And then this line is a dynamic t event t text. And what does that really mean? Well, it means that based on the case of pre-render, whether we are on the client or the server, the event is going to change. The event itself is going to change. And so it's going to change from being never to a response. And never, of course, just coming from here. And so we do pure never just to make it type check. Yeah. And the reason it type checks is because we are returning an m event t text, and then we are returning here an event m event t text. But yeah, so that is how we end up at that. And so in order to switch between these events, like we would have seen if you stuck around to the end of events, if you did, you are a champion. Yet I still recommend it very strongly because this is literally just everything I wish I knew when trying to learn Reflex. Yeah, so this is just going to switch between the events. Yeah, and you know, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know exactly how switch dyn works, but I know that it takes a dynamic of events and gives us the current event. And that's probably what it is I bet you it's using current in its implementation, or switch. Okay, or current. Yes. So, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. And what this will do is show us the text from the response. And so say something like okay or not okay. Oh, all right. And we'll see if this works. So it looks like it's working, but will not send any message. Yep. So, or it is trying to send a message, but there is no event handler to accept it. I wonder if this will work, if we could say just the plain thing, we'll get something here. No, we won't. And there's just nothing. There's no handler accepting it on the back end. Is what's going on. And so that's really all for today. We are definitely well over what I expected for time. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was helpful for you, um, and simplifies learning Reflex. Because there's definitely a lot to learn, but it's definitely worth it at the same time. Because although this is definitely challenging to learn, doing this tutorial was easy. Um, and it is really, really, a case of same shit, different day once you get the hang of Reflex. So yeah, bon voyage and happy coding, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night for you. Bye.